Kristen, the floor is now yours.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that. I just want to give a heads up to everybody that this is going to be interactive. I am going to want you to participate both in the chat and the polling. So with that as a heads up, I'm going to dive right in. $44,000. That's the amount that on average it costs an organization to recruit a new experienced RN to the organization. And when you look at the national averages, it's about $306,000 to shift retention by 1%. So up or down $306,000. So rural healthcare has always had staffing as a major issue, but in today's world, it has become even more challenging than ever. That is why we have to take a critical look at what is happening and what you as leaders can do to make a difference in the environment, the culture, to be the leaders that nobody wants to leave. I'm going to start with a quick poll, and that poll is to ask you just how concerned are you about retention in your organization. So up on the screen, you should see the poll. How concerned are you about turnover in your organization? Very concerned, somewhat concerned, not concerned. All right, this is your chance to talk with us. I want this to be customized to you and what your experiences are so that we can really I can really tailor my remarks today. So, okay, can we see the results so far, or can you put it in progress, Victoria? All right, it looks like the majority of you are very concerned, followed by somewhat concerned, and very few of you are not concerned at all. So thank you, Victoria, for running that poll. That pretty much confirms what I hear pretty much around the country as I do these presentations. There's a real cost to turnover, and I started with some of the financial elements of turnover. And you've told me you're pretty concerned about turnover right now. So what are the costs beyond the dollars? The dollars, really hit me in the gut when I see that, because as a former administrator, I know what it's like to try to balance your budget to make ends meet in small community hospitals. And so when you look at what a drain turnover is, we have to look realistically at what the real costs are, not just financially, but also the level of burnout it creates among your staff that are constantly having to onboard other people. It causes greater burnout than ever before. And it's kind of a cyclical thing. Burnout causes turnover, and turnover causes more burnout. The loss of a sense of team. When we look at engagement factors, having friends at work is really, really important to somebody's level of engagement. And when people leave, there is that loss of team, but there's also that loss of shared knowledge. People learn how to work with one another. They learn the idiosyncrasies of working with one another. And as they do, things flow more smoothly. And when they leave, that's lost. And so it ends up eroding quality, safety, and service in your organization. And COVID has really, of course, increased the number of turnovers. When we look at what has happened in our entire nation in the last year, we've lost 2 million women who have left their jobs because of increased demands at home. And when you think about healthcare being predominantly women, that has a significant effect. It's affecting everything about healthcare. And there are two primary reasons that people leave their jobs. The first is the leader, and the second is culture. But let me start with the leader. When I did my research among nurse leaders across the country to talk to them about why are people leaving, what do you see as the main causes, what should we do differently at the executive level, at the management level? And these are the two themes that really emerged. And when we talked about the leader, I delved into what do you think what are the implications here? And every single person said, I know what I'm doing wrong and I keep on doing it. And so, okay, let me remind you, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. But we're promoting people from the staff to be managers. And I'm all about promoting from within and giving people opportunities. The challenge is that we have great intentions of helping those leaders become more adept at the real leadership skills, but we don't get around to it. The road to turnover is paved with good intentions. We have a lot of leaders who think, I'm going to promote this person from staff nurse to manager, and then I'm going to help mentor them. I'm going to coach them. And it doesn't really happen. They don't have the time to really devote the time and energy that they intend to really developing that leader. And in the meantime, it puts the whole staff into a really vulnerable situation. So keep that in mind. So there's the leader component. And the second component that was brought up over and over again in my research and through the metadata out there is that the culture is huge in turnover. And, it's been said people leave their bosses, not their organizations. And the leader and culture connection is inextricably linked. A study by Gallup showed that 70% of culture is directly influenced by the managers. So I want you to think about this, and this is another poll. How much impact do you think that the department manager has on employee engagement? Okay, this is another poll, and I love your participation. How much impact does the department manager have on employee engagement? Just a few more seconds, please. I'd love your participation. How much impact does the department manager have on employee engagement? Victoria, if that's slowing down, we can show the results. A very high impact. We did have a couple people say low or very low, somewhat low or very low. The data does show, like I said, 70% of the culture is directly influenced by the manager. And so we have to keep that in mind, that if you know that you've got weak managers, you can't expect to improve engagement. And so that leader is really crucial in developing an engaged department. And so the next question really is, and I'm going to skip this as a poll, Victoria, and I'm just going to ask people to think about it. And that is thinking about, okay, if you feel it's a high impact, I want you to think to yourself, what % of your managers currently have been promoted from within? And then think about how much leadership development have they really had in the process. So we're a bit limited on time today. So I want to just keep moving on the core content here and talk about some common assumptions that keep leaders stuck in old habits, and then give you some strategies to help break those old habits. These are the core strategies that are going to help you with retention. So the first assumption is that when it comes to retention strategies, one size fits all. That is so far from the truth. We have to have an unrelenting focus on people as individuals. This has never been as important as it is today because we have to understand the generational differences. When it comes to retention, when you're talking to somebody in their 70s, we have 5 generations in the workforce, which I'll show you in just a minute. But we have to be sensitive to the generational issues and then conduct stay interviews and have ongoing qualitative research to monitor employee concerns. And so that means not just surveys, but having real discussions with people to learn about their concerns. And don't bother doing this if you're not going to do anything about the concerns. Okay. So I tell leaders this all the time. People walk around and they do their rounding questions. Have you got everything you need to do your job? And they say no. And then you say, oh, okay, and move on. It's not a thanks for playing. You have to be able to say, thank you for letting me know. Let me take care of that. Let me see what I can do and get back to them. As I mentioned, 5 generations in the workforce. We only have 2% right now that fall in that traditionalist part of the distribution. But the vast majority are Gen X, millennials, and Zs. And every single day, 10,000 Americans hit retirement age every day, right? Those are the boomers. They're hitting retirement age. And we are not paying close enough attention to that piece of the market or the workforce in terms of retention. Most organizations are focused more on who are the new hires, how do we make sure that we nurture them along in the first 30, 60, 90 days. They do a good job on that. And yet very few have real core strategies on how can we keep some of those boomers working longer. It'll prevent the loss of that intellectual capital. And so think about that as one of your core strategies that you might focus on, because the boomers, because they're aging, they don't want the physical challenge of the 12-hour shift if that's their only option. Maybe they don't even want 8-hour shifts. How flexible are you? Are you able to see where are the options where we need an experienced person, but they don't have to be necessarily on their feet all day? Okay, could these be the people doing post-discharge follow-up calls? Could it be, doing some insurance or billing calls? Things like that. So again, be creative in how you're thinking about retention. In the next 5 years, this millennial bubble is going to shift to 75% of our workforce globally. And so if we are still focused on, the millennials just aren't up to par, the millennials are not what we expected, they're not what we want, we got to stop that kind of thinking and shift to they're not bad or wrong, they just are the way they are. And so how do we as leaders understand them and work with them? And so I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that in a little bit. But that was the first assumption. So the second assumption is my team would really prefer that I hire the next warm body so I can lighten their load. Not so. We have done focus groups around the country for the last 2 decades. And I can tell you that every single group has told me we would rather work short than work with somebody that isn't a good fit or has a negative attitude or doesn't pull their load. No doubt working shorthanded is stressful, and leaders are under constant pressure to hire. But I've done enough of these focus groups to know that the answer is consistently, I'd rather have people that are a good fit with our organization. So that brings me to one of the solutions that may seem so obvious, but is so often overlooked or has been brushed over, hiring for fit. Gallup shows that 82% of turnover goes right back to poor hires. And what happens is we don't take enough time to really think about what is a good fit here with our organizational culture, with our organizational values, with the team, with the team values, and how do they fit with our organizational vision for the culture of the future. So I highly encourage people to think very hard about what are the core characteristics that you really cannot skimp on. Meet with your team members, talk with them. What are these characteristics that we really have to have? And help them define it, help walk them through, once you've defined the key characteristics, what are the behavior-based interview questions that are going to help you identify that in the potential candidates, right? As I teach an 8-module course called Be the Leader, Nobody Wants to Leave, 8 transformational skill builders for busy leaders. And this area, I have seen some of the top executives in organizations identify that they have been not doing everything they can and should be doing in the hiring process, that they rush through, that they don't have really rock solid behavior-based interview questions with a scoring mechanism, so that they're not duped by somebody that is very charming and interviews well. They're really getting into the core characteristics. So hiring for fit is one of the most essential things that every leader can do. And it's an art and a science, and it takes practice, it takes know-how. And we know that 22% of managers say they're not really confident in their hiring skills. So keep that in mind. And remember, there may be areas you can improve on with hiring for fit. In rural communities, this is pretty much, I'm a Wisconsin girl. I've spent most of my career clinically working in community hospitals, and then in administration in community hospitals. And so I have a pretty good feel for, sometimes your labor pool is really small. That's all the more reason why you have to be crystal clear about who it is you want and how are you going to keep them. So hiring for fit is essential, but then let's go on to assumption number 3, that people almost always leave for money. That's a dangerous assumption, and here's why. If you assume people will leave you for 10 cents an hour more, and I've heard this, I can't tell you how many times, that especially when we're talking about long-term care, we're talking about your nursing home facilities, where turnover is 45% up to 49% in some of the long-term care facilities. If you make that assumption, you're missing the opportunity to really engage with people and help them stay connected. I can tell you that when we do focus groups with frontline staff and we ask them, what inspires you to do great work? And they will talk from the heart. They will talk about they want to make a difference, that they want their patients or their residents treated like they would want their parents treated. And so they talk very much from the heart. Money rarely gets mentioned by the frontline staff when we ask that question. When we ask managers what inspires them to do good work, again, they respond from the heart, that they want what is best. They want to be mission driven. They want to do what is best for their community members. And then when we ask, what do you think inspires your staff? Often we hear money. And if a leader feels that money is the key motivator, they do miss the opportunity to say, how can I really engage this person better? How can I show them how much I appreciate their contributions? How can I talk to them so that they stay connected to purpose? So when you think about all of those things, be aware that money is not the main motivator. People want to feel valued. They want to know that they're making a contribution. When we look at millennials want to know that they're contributing in some way to the bigger purpose of the organization. So how do you get around this? Okay. The first thing you have to keep in mind is you've got to stay connected. This goes back to seeing people as individuals first. And that requires that you stay connected, that you foster your own presence and visibility to help boost engagement. Rounding. Now, we've all been taught how important rounding is. Whether you look at the healthcare research, you look at some that Gallup has done, it is one of the most beneficial ways to stay engaged with your team. But when we teach coaching, when we're teaching managers to be better coaches, one of the things we really stress is you've got to get out there. You've got to be rounding, not just for your visibility and presence, but you've got to have that opportunity to observe, to listen with your eyes as much as your ears, so that you're picking up on the nuances of things that are happening in your department, so that you can be on top of things. When you start to sense a shift, you start to sense that maybe somebody is withdrawing. One of the most dangerous signs is when your most engaged people become silent. When that's happening, it is time to engage in meaningful conversation. And that's not going to happen in your office, behind a closed door, and behind your desk. It's going to happen when you are out and about. And so be aware of this, make it a priority, have meaningful conversations. I'm going to give you some examples of ways to have meaningful conversations, but while you're out and about, having meaningful conversations and being empathetic. This last year and a half, we've had to be more empathetic to our staff than ever before, because everything they're going through comes onto our units and into our departments. And we have to be empathetic about their lives and what they're going through as well. So one of the key things that is often overlooked is that we don't often use stay interviews to the best advantage. When we do stay interviews, I want to make sure that we understand a lot of us do hiring interviews, and a lot of us do exit interviews. A stay interview is your opportunity to re-recruit your best. And so it's an art and a science. And it's, again, something that we teach in our Be the Leader, Nobody Wants to Leave course. It gives you an opportunity to talk about their career aspirations. You're one-on-one with this person and you're talking with them about career aspirations, so that you, the leader, know how you can support them. This is vital, because millennials, Gen X and millennials and Gen Zs are very quick studies. And when they master a skill, they want to know what's next. And if you aren't talking to them about that, they're going to look elsewhere, because they'll figure, oh, well, I've gone as far as I can go. And I often get people that tell me, well, what if they want to be promoted? What if that's their real aspiration? Well, it may be, but chances are really good that if they're in that age bracket and they're still, at a frontline position, that you can mentor them on developing leadership skills, having that conversation. And so many leaders aren't prepared to have those conversations because they think really finitely in terms of, oh, we don't have a supervisor position or a manager position, so my hands are tied. Don't think that finitely. Think about what skills could you help them build so that they don't leave the organization. Asking questions too, like what makes a good day for you? And have them talk about a good day. You know, what can I do to help make sure that you have more of those good days? What might make you dread coming to work? I had a conversation once with a staff person, and I was blown away because I asked this question, you know, what might make you dread coming to work? And she said, when Dr. Jones is the hospitalist on my unit, I hate coming to work because he doesn't round with us as he's supposed to. He doesn't close the loop with patients and families and so on and so forth. And so it gave us an opportunity to talk with him about, okay, now remember the expectation is that we round nurse and doctor when we go into the patient room on rounds. And remember that, you know, these are the expectations. So nobody was holding this provider accountable. And so it gave us the opportunity to help bring him back to the expectations in the department, in the organization. Learning what might make them dread coming to work, asking that question is, again, this questioning style is an art and a science, but it can reveal so much about the culture of your department. And many leaders never ask this question. The other question is asking them, not if they've ever considered leaving, but I like to ask, when was the last time you thought about leaving? And many leaders are horrified that I encourage them to ask this question. But when you look at the data, as many as 64% of American workers are thinking about a job change. That's a lot of people. And guess what? They're in your workforce. So if you're not asking them this, you aren't even aware of your own vulnerabilities. So let me just ask you quickly in the chat, say yes or no. Do you routinely ask your employees when they last considered leaving or if they've considered leaving their position? Just yes or no in the chat area. I'd love to hear from you. No, but I will now. I've only seen a couple yeses, but the most of you are saying no. This is a really important question. I love to follow this question with another question, which is, can you tell me about what was the situation at that point that made you feel like you needed to look? All right. That is a really important question, again, because it reveals things that are going on in your department. And when we ask, oh, you know, tell me more about that, you know, what could I do differently to make sure that that's not happening? All right. So it allows you to be part of the solution. You're not ignoring them. And you don't want to say, well, why didn't you come to me? The next question needs to be, you know, Jane, next time you have those feelings, may I ask you to please come to me? Yeah, somebody also said in the chat, and I've never had a supervisor ask me that either. See, we got to get real with people. We talk all the time about transparency, but let's get real. You know, how transparent are we really? You know, I really wish too that some of my supervisors had asked me. It could have, you know, I think about some major job changes that I've made. I remember one time a CEO saying, I can't believe you're leaving, you're so engaged. Well, yeah, that was the image I put forward to the world because I was professional, but my manager was squishing me like a bug. I felt like I couldn't grow, I couldn't have any opportunities. And so the best thing for me to do was to leave. So, okay, so asking about leaving, ask what you can do to make the department better. Ask what you can do to make your department better. And the thing about doing state interviews is you have to be ready for whatever is said. And so one of the things I've developed is this cheat sheet of here might be awkward moments that come up in these state interviews and what you can do about it. Because oftentimes leaders are terrified of going into this discussion for what they might hear. So you don't want to get defensive. You want to remain open, and you want this to be a learning opportunity, because the stay interview, that is your opportunities to start crafting the personal retention strategy. So as an organization, you need a retention strategy, but as a manager, you need personal retention strategies for every one of your staff members. And I joke about this. I remember years ago hearing a dentist say, you don't have to brush all your teeth, just the ones you want to keep. And I think about stay interviews this way. You don't have to do stay interviews on everybody, just the ones you want to keep. And hopefully, if you hired right, you want to keep them all. All right. So then meaningful recognition. Meaningful recognition is so important. Make it prompt, personal, and plentiful. How do your people want to be recognized? Now more than ever, people are weary. They are weary, not just from COVID, but, there's another pandemic, and that's a pandemic of grieving that we've lost a lot this past year as individuals, as people. We've lost time with our loved ones. We've lost the baptisms, the births, the parties, the celebrations we've had together. So we have to be more mindful than ever about recognizing people, and one of the things I love to do, and I've asked this probably to maybe 30,000 people or more when I think about all the keynotes I've given. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hands here, or just say yes when I ask the second question. Okay, first question is, I want to know how many of you have ever gotten a meaningful handwritten thank you note from your boss. And then the real question I want yes or no here is, of those that got those messages and were meaningful, how many of you kept them? Yes. Say yes, I've kept it, or just yes, I've kept that note. All right. Here's my non-scientific report back on this, is that over 95% keep them. I love this. Some keep them in a binder. They have a shout out board. We keep them all. That is amazing. I was teaching my class a couple weeks ago, and I got to this part about recognition, and somebody panned her camera over to show her bulletin board, and she said, these are thank yous that I have gotten over the last 3 jobs that I've had, and I bring them with me because they are so meaningful. So remember, a handwritten thank you note, that it's a gift that keeps on giving. And when you send them to somebody's home, you've raised the bar just a little bit. And when you also send thank yous to the family, the children, the spouses, and say, thank you for sharing your mom, your dad. They do such important work here. It makes a huge difference. Help people connect to purpose. Leaders have a 2-pronged responsibility. One is you connect to purpose yourself, because it fills your cup. What fills your cup? But then knowing how to help your staff connect to purpose. Again, this is an art and a science that is often just kind of overlooked. People think theoretically, oh yeah, connection to purpose, it's important. There are steps you can take that help you know how to help each individual on the staff connect to purpose. And I've got a lot of examples that I love to share on what you can do. It's beyond the scope of this presentation, but we do have a method for that. Employees who are connected to purpose are more fulfilled, more passionate, and more invested in the success of your organization. You know, you think about the engaged people and that are really connected to purpose. When somebody asks them where they work, and they tell with pride what they do. I'm going to move on to assumption number 4. You can't change somebody's attitude. Nope, you can't. But nothing erodes a leader's credibility faster than tolerating bad behavior. So you can't change somebody's attitude, but you can set really clear expectations for the behaviors you want to see in your organization. And if you tolerate the intolerable, then people are going to not respect you as a leader. So no, you can't tolerate or can't change people's attitude. But here's something I want every leader to ask themselves before they blame attitude. You've got to ask yourself these 3 questions. Well, 2 before you get to the 3rd. Do they know what to do? All right. Have I made that expectation clear? Do they know how to do it? Have we taught them? And then do they want to do it? And I think about this so often because we do a lot of work in culture and patient experience. Do you have standards in place that are very clear? That's the what. Okay. Have you exposed them to the standards? I can't tell you how many organizations I've done culture work with where they have standards, but they sit in a binder and nobody ever talks about them. Do they know how to do it? Have they had adequate training? And training is only the first level. Coaching, day-to-day coaching is where it really matters. Then you can ask, is it attitudinal or do they want to do it? So there are some steps organizations can take to create a culture that they really want. What is your desired culture? So a lot of organizations, I would say 99% of the organizations I work with have never really defined this. So how do you go about this? Well, first you have to ask yourself, what does that future look like? What does that future culture look like to us? The second question, after you've kind of looked at what does that future culture look like, sound like, feel like, the next is, how do we get there? How do we get from where we are today to where we need to be? That's where you have to be mapping out your strategies and tactics. The third question, which I think is the most important one, is who do we have to be as leaders in order to move us to that next level? And so asking these 3 questions are huge in moving your organization forward, but there are 2 parallel paths that have to happen to get you there. You have to be able to look at your leaders and define what are the competencies that are going to get us there. Does everybody here know how to coach other people? Do all of our leaders know how to coach people and hold people accountable? Are they good communicators? So those are the 4 things you have to work on with leaders to make sure that you can move from point A to point B. But on the front line, to identify who are your rock stars today, have them help you develop standards, right? That are going to help you live the values. Because if standards are released as an edict from up above, you're not going to get the buy-in as you would with having your star performers help craft those standards. Then you conduct training. And training is not a single event. It's got to be an ongoing strategy that happens on the units in coaching relationships so that you can help people really own the way. So when I talk about the way, you want to kind of brand the experience, right? You want to be able to create an organization where people want to work and they're proud of. All of that has to do with creating your brand where you're consistently living your mission, vision, and values. We're getting close to the end, so pardon me if I go really fast here. I just have a couple more things I want to make sure we cover. One-on-one coaching. Do your managers, do your directors, does every person in leadership know how to do that? Spotting levels of engagement and then knowing how to coach to those levels of engagement. We know that with coaching, you can keep your fully engaged people. You can move 1 out of 5 of your engaged people up and the rest will stay engaged. 1 of 2 of the somewhat engaged will actually move. And only 1 of 10 of the disengaged will move. And where do leaders spend the bulk of their time? These are things that we really emphasize when we teach coaching, is how to coach to the level of engagement. So having a comprehensive strategy for retention requires several things. You got to grow the leaders, not bosses. I remember when I became a manager for the first time, there was a lot more attention on how to manage the time cards and the budget than there ever was on how to talk to my people. Hiring for fit is the first stage of a great retention strategy. And so if you don't have a rock solid hiring process in place and you're sure that every manager knows how to do it, start there. Have a clear path for professional development and make sure every manager knows about it. And then maintain open communication and provide meaningful work with a connection to purpose. Be that brand you can be proud of. And keep up, of course, with competitive wages. So I'm going to skip this poll for sake of time. And I just want to wrap up, make sure that you have my email and phone number information. Please don't hesitate to reach out. I am very happy to have a complimentary, hour-long call with people. All you have to do is just reach out to me via my email and just put in the subject line strategy, and I'll be happy to talk with you about that. But you remember, you as leaders, you're the keeper of the culture. Define it, design it, and own it with fanatical consistency. Then, and only then, will you be a leader that people never want to leave. So thank you, everybody. I appreciate your participation.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I believe there is only one question, a request for the training that was talked about.
Okay,
Other than that,
it's called Be the Leader Nobody Wants to Leave, 8 Transformational Skill Builders for Busy Leaders. And you can find that on my website, baird-group.com. We have our next mixed cohort starting July 22nd. I also do cohorts for individual organizations as well.
thank you. This concludes our session. We will have a 15-minute break, and we will be back at approximately 11 o'clock. Thank you very much, everybody.
Could you put the website in the chat, Miss?
I'm doing that
Okay.
right now.
Thank you.
And I'm also going to put my email too.